The entire first season of Halo is now streaming on Paramount Plus or wherever you get Paramount Plus shows, depending on where you are in the world. I know some networks have it a little bit different. This is a show that has had a lot of conversation generated around it over the last couple of months while it's been airing. So without further ado, let's talk about it. Essentially following the story of Master Chief, played in this one by Pablo Schreiber. He is trying to lead the Spartans to victory against the Covenant, but it turns out that they need an artifact in order to do so, which is something that he can access, which is unlocking certain things in him that are not quite understood as of yet, but hopefully will make more sense as the show goes on. And there's another subplot involving a girl named Quan Ha who is trying to lead a rebellion on the planet Madrigal against a man named Fincher, and it seems that things are very, very dire in that scenario, and so she could use all the help that she can get. I was interested in this show, but as video game adaptations go, I was also a little bit nervous. For what it's worth, the adaptations for famous video games are not necessarily the best. Like, historically speaking, they've had some ups and downs. But nonetheless, when I saw the aesthetic value on display, when I saw the costumes in particular, and it seemed like they'd pulled straight from the games, I was pretty excited to see what the final product would be. And there's been a lot of discourse, like I said, over the last couple of months. Some folks have been very happy with some things, some folks have been noticeably very angry with other things. And it does make changes to the lore of the games quite a bit. This is telling its own story. Apparently the showrunners have stated they didn't really look at the games to make this adaptation. Aesthetically, they probably did, because you can clearly tell, like, visually speaking, they've gone into that stuff quite often. But in terms of the storytelling, this is its entirely new thing. This is a totally different thing compared to what you've seen. But the way I see it, it's all about execution. Sure, you can make a different plot and you can do some different stuff here and there in terms of the storytelling, but at the end of the day, it does come down to how you're pulling it off. See, changes are often going to be met with some kind of derision, and so you want to try and make sure in terms of like the damage control process that, okay, fine, we'll make that change, but we're going to do a proper justification for why we're making that change. However, there was a lot of heat on this show from the very first episode because you get a face reveal. You do see Master Chief's face underneath that helmet. Now, this is a big moment. I mean, in terms of the canon of the games, this is huge. And so you're expecting the show to do it a little bit either later or at least do it in a much more, affecting way that it makes sense. And that hero sense that comes with the character is a bit on and off. Sometimes you feel like that's him, that's the Master Chief. And sometimes they're like, that's the Master Chief? Really? I don't really know about that. That's the whole show, essentially. There's a lot of on and off stuff. And everything that I like, equally it is met with things that I did not like about that exact same thing. Like, for example, the action sequences. There are some incredible ones. Episodes 5 and especially the season finale, there's some stuff where they've pulled directly from the games and you can clearly tell. There's some camera angle stuff, in fact, and there's some FPS moments that were really, really great. Episode 5, I would say, was honestly the best one. Like, that entire thing with the ambush from the Covenant and then the Spartans and everyone fighting against them, that was pretty awesome. And it's a very brutally done sequence as well. That was definitely great. But then there are other moments, especially the very first fight of the series, which is not quite as great. Like, you can noticeably tell CGI when it comes to the Covenant. There's a point which some folks have noted on the internet involving a gun toss. Like, it just gets tossed onto the ground and you can clearly tell that gun floated onto the ground, which is a little bit disappointing. Well, it's actually very disappointing that that effect was sort of in there despite all of that. And there are moments throughout the entire season where you can tell CGI goes from being really great to really weak very quickly. And that also involves everything else, like especially the writing and the acting. Sometimes it'll be really, really great, and sometimes it'll be really, really weak. And so there are a lot of inconsistencies that are there throughout the first season. Does that make it a terrible show? No, there are things that in here that, like I said, I do appreciate. And it's one of those situations when it works, you can clearly tell, like, that's the stuff they need to focus on. So I'm hoping that whenever season 2 happens, they learned from what worked in this first season and they doubled down on it. The things that I did like, however, there are some standouts that I did really want to give a shout out to. The performances are all fairly solid. Pablo Schreiber is pretty good as Master Chief. He is a little wooden at times though, which I guess makes sense for the character, but then as the episodes progress, he gets a lot better. The girl who plays Kwan Ha was also really good, although I thought the couple of standouts that came up were Bokeem Woodbine as Soren and Kate Kennedy as Kai 125. They were the two supporting characters to our two leads over here who added so much to the entire show. I loved these characters. They were a ton of fun to have on screen, and they were having the time of their lives. And I really want to see more of Kai 125 going forward because she seemed like the silver bullet that the show was holding on to, and sometimes you can see that come into effect, but it just kind of holds her back. I hope that in season 2 they do not hold her back. Like, just let her swing for the fences, man. That character deserves it. Speaking of characters who are pretty great, it is nice to see that they brought Jen Taylor back, not just as the voice, but in live action appearance as Cortana. She was fantastic. In fact, in terms of the games, I think the best thing they did was bring Cortana to life in this show. I thought she was wonderfully handled. And now, granted, I haven't played all of the games. I'm not the most well-versed Halo fan in the world. But I understand why there are certain things that are not working for fans. And it goes beyond the helmet thing. Honestly, when they said they were doing that, I was okay with it on one regard. I was like, okay, sure. But the execution is key. I go back to that point because it wasn't as great as it could have been. There's also some stuff they add with an origin story, which has gotten a very divisive response. Now, granted, the shows, the games and the novels, they've explored aspects of this, so it's not totally unique to this show. Like, they've never done this before. But again, it's about how you do it. And this takes a very generic way of doing it. Like, a lot of things are like things you've seen 1,000 times before involving, how they've gotten to this point. And so when the plot developments happen, it was like, we've seen this before. This is not a totally new thing. So yes, that was also a bit of an issue. Sometimes the directing was also an issue as a result of this. Again, it was very on and off. The consistency wasn't the best. I would say episodes 5 and 7 were the best directed. 7, which is almost solely focused on Kwan Ha, the latter half of that episode is a lot of fun. It's really rivetingly done. And I'm hoping that, they just give her own show because they clearly want to tell that story. So, you'll probably get some kind of a spin-off down the line, and I wouldn't necessarily mind that. They've clearly set up for more in her story along the way. The show also makes a decision towards the end that I don't know how I feel about. It's one of those things where you kind of understand why it's happening, kind of, but the execution of it is not the best because now you're suddenly thinking, well, now what? And also because it takes away something very core that they've been working towards in this entire season so far till now, and it kind of messes with that. And that happens in the last few minutes. It just really messes up the whole flow, and I've been thinking about it now for a day, and I genuinely can't tell where I land on it. Like, there are things that I do like about it, but then there are also things that I'm a little flip-floppy on. I also want to talk quickly about McKee. I don't know the actress's name, and I do apologize for that, but she was really good in this. I thought she was an interesting character, but again, there's a lot that we could have learned about her along the way that I think would have made it seem a little less repetitive in terms of some of the character beats, but she did a really good job. The connection that she establishes with Master Chief as the show progresses is very interesting, which led to something that some fans were not happy over, but I'm gonna leave that conversation for some other experts. I'm just here to talk about the rest of the show. But overall, I thought the first season of Halo left some stuff to be desired still. There are things that I do like about it, but I'm hoping that the next season doubles down on those things and it rectifies some of the mistakes that are made here. Because even if you're not a major fan of the games, you can look at this one and go, there's issues here. Like, even as a show in its own regard, it's got some issues. And those definitely need ironing out, and so I'm hoping that those do happen in due course of time. I'm gonna give Halo Season 1 a C+. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Have you guys played the Halo games? What's your favorite Halo game? Why don't you tell me that? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And what did you think of the season itself? As always, if you like this, guys, please do subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. And I'll see you guys at the movies.